Hello guys, welcome back to another A Day in a Life working in IT. It has been a while since I made one of these videos. I'm sorry if I have been busy and haven't posted, but I am gonna be posting constantly from now on, so stay tuned for more videos, more tutorials, and more realistic A Day in a Life in IT. And for today's video, I will be taking you with me in the tasks that I have to do in IT and also show you what we usually do and also give you some tips, and also we'll be talking a bit about networking and the basic concepts of networking, especially the address that we constantly use, IP address and MAC address. So if you're interested, please keep on watching, and without further ado, let's get started with the video. Okay, so today is a Friday and I usually clean up every Friday, just retire old assets, and one of my projects is to upgrade and replace our old assets, especially if they are 10 years old. We still do have machines that are 10 years old or more that we have to upgrade in preparation to migrate to Windows 11, because we are still on Windows 10 21H2 version. So in a few years, I think in 2025, Windows 10 will reach end of support or end of life, so we are slowly migrating into Windows 11, and a lot of our hardware can support the requirements for Windows 11. So it's really not easy for a company, an entire company, to migrate to a newer system, especially if everything has been working so far. But since we have to upgrade everything and technology always evolves, we have to migrate into what is the standard practice now. So that's one of my projects, and I'm just gonna show you what I've been working on. And now I'm in the storage room in our building. I'll kind of show you around in here and what kind of assets we retire. Okay, so first of all, we retire this, or upgrade, replace this kind of monitors. They're heavy and bulky and old, and not just that, it's because they have old ports that we really don't use as much anymore. Just like this one, for example, it only has 2 DVI ports and a mini display port, which is outdated because the standard right now is HDMI and display ports. So we are getting rid of this kind of monitors because they are heavy and bulky and have really old ports. Okay, so for the desktop that we have been retiring, we had this HP Elite Desk 800 G1 towers that were released around 2014, so it is around 10 years old now. So we have been replacing them because the lifespan of desktop computers are around 10 years, and over time they get really slower, and most of the time they are no longer compatible with software and firmware updates. So it is better to update to a newer model because there's a lot more issues that we can encounter if the machine is really old, and sometimes it's not worth it to spend a lot of time troubleshooting those issues anymore than just to replace it. Also, from all of these G1 towers, we had spinners in them, so we are also replacing all of our desktops with spinners with SSD, and spinners is the term that we use for hard disk drives. We really stay away from them now when we are using machines. We just use SSD. They are more faster, of course, and reliable. Okay, so for today's video, I will also be doing a quick tutorial about fundamentals of networking 101 before I make videos about more complicated stuff like setting up switches, configuring switches, routing, firewalls, and such. So I think it's really good to build our fundamentals in networking, and we should start with the most common and basic concepts that we use in networking. So before I show you commands for IP address, how we set up IP address, types of IP address, let us now first define what an IP address is. So the simplest explanation that I can give you is that an IP address is a unique identifier for every device or network that connects to the internet. So basically, if you need to connect to the internet, you need to have an IP address address for the machine. So every machine that uses the internet has a very unique IP address that's assigned to it. If your machine doesn't have an IP address assigned to it, it cannot reach the internet. There is also another address that is being used by a lot of machines and devices, and we call it MAC address. So a MAC address is kind of similar but also different with an IP address, and it's a unique identifier for every electronic device. So now, what is the difference between an IP address and a MAC address? So the most obvious difference between an IP address and a MAC address is the form that they use. So IP address uses period as separators and MAC address uses colons as separators. Okay, so I mentioned earlier that they are both unique identifiers. So they're very similar in a way, but what is the difference? If they are both uniquely identifying machines or devices, what makes them different? So to make it even more simpler to understand, I'm always using this analogy of like a person. A person is just like a machine. We all have a unique identifier. And I always compare a MAC address to my name or every person's name. So every device has a unique identifier that identifies them, what kind of device they are, what make and model. So every person has a name that is just uniquely theirs, first name and last name. So that is a MAC address. And now I am gonna compare IP address to like a home address. So every person obviously lives in a house or a home, and they have an address like for a home or apartment or building they are living in. So that is also unique to a person, but that can also change. Like a home address can also change if we move to a different state or a different house. An IP address can also change if you assign a different, like a static IP to it, or if you restart, for example, a machine. If it has a DHCP address, it can also change during the reboot. So same with home address, IP address can change for a machine, but MAC address is unique. It will never change for a machine, just like a name will never change for a person. So I hope that I am not boring you with all of these theoretical concepts. Let's now move on to a more practical way that we use IP address and MAC address. So first of all, how do we find an IP address? Well, there's different ways and methods in finding IP address, and I will show you all of them. Okay, so how to find out where your IP address is. So there's different ways in finding your IP address. I will show you the easiest way first. So what we're gonna do is you open command prompt, and we can use a command to find your IP address and other address like the default address. So you just type in ipconfig and it will show you your IP address. So for me, so in here, it will just show you this one. IPv4 is what you're looking for. So there is also another way to find or look for your IP address. And this is a longer way to do it. So you can open control panel and then go to Network and Sharing Center, and then change adapter settings in here. And as you can see, just find which connection you have. So normally it's the Wi-Fi connection, or if you're connected through Ethernet, it will just show like a green signal icon in here. So for me, this is the Wi-Fi, and we can just right click on the Wi-Fi and then click on properties and find the one that says Internet Protocol version. So if you click on that, this is where you can find your static IP address. So this is a longer method, and what I always use is the command method. Okay, so next is how do we find our MAC address? So there's also different methods on how to do this. The easy way is same with the IP address. Just open up command prompt and type the command ipconfig, and this time we are gonna add an option /all, and that will show more information other than just the IP address, the default mask. So if you scroll down, you will find your IP address, of course, and you will also find your MAC address. So how do you find your MAC address in here? There's a lot of information in here, and sometimes it gets confusing, but just remember the format that MAC address uses. So we talked about that earlier, and the format that it uses is colon or dash for MAC address. So if you try to find it, you can't find one that says MAC address in here. There's different address, IPv4 address, subnet mask, default gateway, but MAC address is called something else if you run this command. So it's actually this physical address. And if you look into the format that it uses, like this in here, physical address, it uses the dash format. Sometimes you can see colon, sometimes you can see dash in here. But MAC address is also called physical address, and sometimes it's called BUI, which means burned in address. So that's what you need to look for: MAC address, physical address, or BUI. Okay, so there are also two types of IP address that we use. There is the static IP address and the dynamic or DHCP IP address. So a static IP address is a fixed address that you assign to a machine, while dynamic is dynamically assigned, or a server that's called a DHCP server assigns whatever IP address is available to the machine. So it doesn't have a fixed address. So in my work in IT, I always deal with IP address when I'm troubleshooting, or for example when I am setting up servers. So these computers are used for our servers here, and we usually set up a static IP for it because we need to have a fixed IP address that never changes for the machines just like this. So we will be able to access it remotely and access it whenever, because for example, if it's dynamic, if somehow the server reboots and it changes the IP address, if a website for example is pointing to this server or whatever, or we need to access this server, if it changes, then our server will be down and be offline because it can no longer reach the machine because it changed the IP. So we need to have like a fixed IP address for situations like that. Okay, so now I am gonna show you how to change your IP address if you are assigning a static IP to your computer or machine, especially on Windows. So this is common for like our printers. We want to set a static IP to machines that are important to us and that we want to have a fixed IP, just like the server's access point. So in computers, this is how you assign a static IP. So open control panel, and then let's go back to our network and sharing center here. Then select on change adapter settings, and then go to the driver where you want to assign the static IP. Usually we do this with the Ethernet, for example. So I'm just gonna show you for the Ethernet. So I'm gonna right click here and select properties, and just like how we find our IPv4 address or the IP address, we can select this one that says Internet Protocol version 4. Double click on that, and then this is how you will set or assign a static IP. So right now, what this means is if this is checked or marked obtain an IP address automatically, this means that we are getting DHCP address. It's dynamically given to us by the DHCP server. But if you want to set a static IP for your machine, click on this, use the following IP address, and just fill this out. So for example, 192.17.8.25. For the example, that's the IP address that you have to assign it to. Just make sure that you will fill up all of this as well. That depends on what your company has. So make sure that the DNS server is also populated in here. And once you have all of this information, just click on OK, and then if you open it again, it should have all the information that you just assigned it to. So that is how you set up a static IP for a computer. Also, there's another type of IP address that you might encounter, especially if you don't have internet or you're having some network issues. You might see this IP address that starts with 169. So if you are using Windows, that is called APIPA address, which stands for Automatic Private IP Addressing. So if you see an IP address that starts with 169 and the range is 169.254.1.0 to 169.254.254.255. That means that you're not reaching the internet because the DHCP server isn't available and the server is not reachable and the device can't communicate out of the network. So you have to fix that if you see that IP address when you type in ipconfig. Okay, so how do we fix an APIPA address if you happen to see it and you have network issues? So there are also commands that you can use to fix that. We have this, what we call IP/release command, and what it does is it sends requests to the DHCP server to abandon active lease and remove your current IP address. So for example, you have a DHCP, you can somehow like reset that dynamic address and maybe request for a new one since you are having internet issues. So this is the command that you will run, ipconfig release. And then there's also another command that you have to run after the release. You always have to run ipconfig/renew, and this renews the IP address. So it gives you a new dynamic or DHCP address after releasing it. So this can fix your internet connectivity issues if you happen to encounter the APIPA address or the one that starts with 169. Also, best practice, just a tip, if you're assigning an IP address to a machine, a static IP address, is to ping the IP address that you're going to be using first, just to make sure that it's not available. If it's not pinging, it means that it's most likely available.